Hey there, welcome back. In this video, we'll ask for microphone permission. In order to do that, first in the manifest file, declare the permissions our app needs to request. Just add another item, user permissions, and select record audio. Close it. Now, Android comes with a ready-to-use function to request permissions. All it needs to know is what permissions we're asking for. So let's create an array of string to store permissions in the main activity and then ask for them. Private var permissions array of strings, and it should contain the permission we're looking for is in the manifest permissions audio record or record audio. Okay, now we also need a variable, so let's define it here. This one is permission granted, and by default it's set to false. And add a constant val requested or request code and set it to 200. We'll be using it in a moment. First thing on activity created, check whether permissions are already granted or not. To do this, let's use the activity compat.self-check, and it needs this and the permissions we're checking, and if the result is equal to package manager permission granted, then we have it. Otherwise, we need to ask for it. Here, let's give it just the one permission we're asking for. Now, if the application doesn't have the requested permissions yet, ask for them. So if permission is not granted, then just call activity compat.request permissions, give it the context, the permissions we're asking for, and the request code we created earlier. So what happens here, the user will be presented with the UI for accepting them. After the user has accepted or rejected them, you will receive a callback reporting whether the permissions were granted or not. Your activity to deal with it has to implement activity compat on request permissions result callback, and the results of permission requests will be delivered to its on request permission result method. So let's implement it just here. On request permissions result, here we have a request code, the permissions we asked for, and the grant results. Now what we need to do is, if the request code equals the request code that we defined here, then we should update permissions granted. So check for it. If request code equals our request code, then permission granted should be equal to the grant results we received back. And since grant result is an integer and permission granted is a boolean, compare it to this one, permission granted. If it's equal, then we have the permission. Otherwise, permission granted should be set to false, and we don't have the permissions. So the user may or may not grant you permission, but the app needs it in order for the app to work properly. Therefore, you have to check whether you have the permission each time you would like to start recording. So here, to handle the record button, we need to create another function and make sure we check for the permissions first. So private function start recording. If permission not granted, then we should ask for this and just leave. Otherwise, we will be able to start recording here in the next video. Now in the onCreate, set a listener on the start button or record button, and it is not completing the name because we need a module in the Gradle app module file. Here add another module or plugin. This one is Kotlin Android extensions. Just sync and head back to the main activity. Here we should have it just there. Now set on click listener and just start recording. Now if you launch it, you should be asked for permission at app startup. Here we have the permission, the UI we talked about, and let's just accept it. If I click again on record, I won't see it because I've already accepted. So that's it for this video. In the next one, we will start recording with the media recorder. See you then.